But you're basically talking about opposites creating each other, and kind of gets into the way that uh, I guess it's a separation of non-duality into duality. It creates a structure for our reality in the way that it's kind of how things start existing. And you can see that in, well, like when we talk about the separate or creation by separation, and there's that source consciousness that splits itself into everything and makes everything out of it. But we can see that in just pairs of opposites, in the way you can't have one opposite without the other, and kind of like entanglement with particles. As soon as one has information, then the one it's entangled with automatically has information because that one has information. So I guess the easiest example I usually give is if you have like a rectangle and someone asks you what side is the front of it and which side is the back of it, and neither of them are labeled, then you don't know. Either side could be, it needs something to be relative to. But as soon as you label one side of it as the back, then you don't even have to label the other side of it as a front, because the front is simultaneously created by the creation of the back. Kind of like the blank canvas and drawing on it and stuff, you need that contrast.
Yeah, you need two different colors. If you had a white canvas and you had white paint, you're not really going to see. If they're the exact same color, you're not going to see what you're painting.
Yeah.
You're going to be painting nothing. So you need that contrast, the opposition. Yin and yang, you just need both those sides in effect. Like you were saying, they create one another.
Right.
You can't have one without the other. As soon as you identify one, you immediately identify the other. If I was to say that's up and point up, you would immediately know which way is down. It's created by the opposition. So you need opposition and contrast. It gives you that fill in that, yeah, there's more than one perspective. There's the infinite amount of perspectives. Because once you start identifying, there's so much things you can have in opposition or contrast. And it's just, like you were saying, trying to identify something. Like if you wanted to identify a dog, you would have to describe so much about a dog. You'd even have to describe its surroundings, all of its involvements. And so by describing a dog, you're describing more than a dog. You're describing its atmosphere.
Yeah, and all the implications of that.
Yeah, just so much more outside of a dog. You're describing grass. You're describing trees, wherever the dog may be.
Yeah, and it kind of keeps itself growing, because someone can find out what a dog is, but not know all those implications yet. But those implications are still there. And then they can know what a dog is, and then they can find out a couple of those implications, like, oh, okay, so there's a dog, that means there has to be dog food. And then dog food being a thing opens up a whole new set of branches. And then each one of those opens up a whole new set of branches for implications.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like the more you learn, the more there is to know. And it's kind of like it just kind of perpetually keeps itself going like that. It's kind of how people's personalities are made up too. If you take just all the different things you could say about a person, and like their traits and their characteristics, all those things are going to have an opposite. So that creates like a scale, like you have, I don't know, how smart or dumb is this person? And you have like smart up here and dumb down here, and they're somewhere on the scale. But then there's like an infinite amount of scales, just anything you could name.
And there's even all the scales that go into just intelligence and dumb, like what makes them.
Right, exactly. And then all those scales have scales, and all those scales have scales. And then it's just this just collection of scales, and you have a point on each one of these.
It's a good visual to show how everything is sort of intertwined and connected with one another.
Yeah.
There's always going to be reaction, your action and reaction. You don't know where it's going to go because there's so much opposition and contract and so many variables going on at the same time. It's unpredictable what's going to happen.
I think one of the important things about just this opposite thing that we're talking about, how they create each other, is once you get like a good grasp for that, it helps you to realize that all the things you think are bad are necessary for anything that you think is good. It just helps you. You can just see that relation between things that don't want to happen being necessary for things that you do want to happen. Like anybody that's happy in life can think about like the absolute worst time of their life and make that connection that if it wasn't for that, then they wouldn't be where they are now. And it's like if you can apply the more of these scales we're talking about that you can apply that to, the more, but one, it broadens your perspective a lot because it just helps you to see both sides of everything. But then you see the necessity in it and don't feel like something's against you or like offended by a situation or something. It also kind of gives you a visual for your ability to kind of slide where you're at on certain scales that you want to change. Just because usually when you look at opposites as something separate, then it seems like there's something separate. Like, oh man, I'm dumb, so I can never be smart. But because you make it like two separate things, like, oh, they're opposite, so that means you have one or the other. But once you look at it as just like a polarity stuck together with a scale, then it just shows you that kind of path. Like if you visualize it as like two ends with a line connecting it and you're somewhere on that scale, then you can just see that you can slide up and down that scale if you want to. But applying that to obviously whatever you want to apply it to. And then once you get into deeper levels of mindfulness, it can give you control on a broader range of scales that you're able to consciously slide yourself along. The more control you realize you have, and the less control you realize your mind has over you, then the more you're able to kind of get into your settings and slide those scales around. Especially when if you see yourself, if you're kind of looking at yourself as like the observer, kind of looking at yourself as like create a character thing in a game where it can be like, okay, I see all scales, I see like all these different attributes about him, like this is okay how happy or sad he is, this is how this or this he is, this is how this or this, just for an infinite amount of things. And then you can kind of look at yourself and be like, okay, well, let me tweak this one, move it up a little, tweak this one, move it down, and then you can kind of get a picture for where you want to be, and then start living that way. You really create a person you want to be that you can be happy and content with. People don't realize like how literally you can really customize yourself, kind of. Just kind of do it, like you just have to be it. You just have to, okay, I'm this person and this is what that person does. And do it. The universe just peoples. So you be something that does what that thing is that you want to do. Can make you like, okay, well, if this is what I want to do, then I'll make a person that just does that. Because that's just what that person does. That's when you can just, that's pretty much synonymous with just being yourself. Just being able to be a person that can just naturally do what that person does, and then not feel, I don't know, not feel pressured to be a certain way that the person you have isn't supposed to be.